WoW's Borrowed Power is a good system, a great system, one that I think the game needs.
I don't like where this is going.
And without it, the game is boring and it's not being able to retain players. And the only problem is that Blizzard implemented it horribly. First off, Borrowed Power allows the player to experience an actual sense of fantasy and immersion that is tailored to the theme of the expansion. In Legion, we had artifact weapons and legendaries, which were, quote, like historical items of great power from an age past gone. And then sometimes you had hand-me-downs, but they were strong hand-me-downs. Artifact weapons were either from old lore that players recognized or at least heard of, which gave a direct sense of legacy to them. For example, Ashbringer, Gul'dan Staff, Doom Hammer, or they were given its own lore, which may have been a bit more tame than the iconic weapons, but they were still given a reason why they were worthy of being powerful. The Fist of the Heavens, for example, being empowered to a breaking point by one of the elemental lords themselves, the strongest being of wind in existence at the time, allowing the player to tap into the insane elemental might of the weapons. Or a rifle forged directly by the Titans themselves, by inside of a Titan facility, or whatever the hell the lore of the Hunter rifle was. A Titan-infused weapon. Another example is the Heart of Azeroth, which literally allowed us to wield completely new abilities that were completely beautiful to look at, they felt very impactful to use, and they tied into the theme of the players tapping into the power of Azeroth's life force itself, Azerite, which was amazing, and a disappointment we didn't get any weapons or armor themed after it. Even in Shadowlands, Covenant abilities were not only incredibly unique and tailored for each class, but they tied directly into your chosen Covenant, from the looks to the sound effects to the mechanics of the spell itself, like Feline Stomp for Monk, or the more AoE Cone version for Warrior, or Warriors getting a Maldraxxus Battle Standard. Second off, and here's a hot take, the ones who complained the most about Borrowed Power were hardcore raiders, PvPers, and overall just hardcore progression players. Players who make up a fraction of the player base and shouldn't have a say if they're only going to talk about their own game modes and difficulty when talking about grind or balance. Now the rest of the player base blindly follows these players on what is considered good in the game, which I strongly believe is wrong, but it's not all the time wrong, to be fair. When the Borrowed Power system is incredibly spiky in power, the largest source of your damage, and a pain in the ass to grind, this is felt even at the casual level. Azerite gear and corruptions and Legion legendaries are examples of this. But for example, on why hardcore players don't speak for everyone, Conduit Energy in Shadowlands was not a big deal, period. I don't care what anyone says, unless you are a hardcore progression player. I played almost all of Shadowlands, pugging up to heroic raid completion, completely casual, but semi-casual because I did put in the effort to gear my character in as many pugs as I could. Never once did Conduit Energy ever in my life in playing that game become an issue. I don't get what everybody is complaining about. The only people I've ever heard complain about it were my friends, the mythic progressors, and people like Asmongold, who actually did do a lot of mythic progression throughout most of his WoW playtime. So even if he's not doing mythic raiding, he can still understand personally why the system feels bad, but doesn't clarify it's only really ever bad for hardcore progression players, which do not make up the majority of the player base. The loudest voices for the game are streamers and YouTubers who are only content creators for WoW because they do parsing and progression content, where their system would be an issue. Therefore, all players watching agree without realizing that it hardly affects their fucking play experience in the first place. Now, Conduit Energy should have been fixed for hardcore progression players if it was that big of an issue. And it really would have never affected casual players because it didn't affect us in the first place. It didn't matter. They could have taken it out of the game. It didn't matter. But I get annoyed when I hear people on YouTube and the streamers and people like Asmongold say like, oh, the entire expansion was bad because of this system. Every player didn't like this system. Every player suffered because of this system. It's like, no, just the hardcore parsers, progression people did. PvP players included, with the Heart of Azeroth, how getting some of the abilities were really powerful in PvP, but hard to get or RNG based, and people didn't like the system of getting the Heart of Azeroth powers. Same thing with corruptions. I think Falling Star might have been also a problem in PvP. And to get a piece with a high ranked corruption was also just RNG and painful. And the same goes for Artifact Power and Legion, with progression players in all game modes complaining because it really only affected them to such a degree that it affected their play experience. But legendaries were such a powerful spike for all players that it was, in my opinion, correct for everyone to complain about the RNG of the system. Same with Azurite gear, and once again, corruptions. These systems make the power brackets for all players very defined. If you had the right piece of corruption, legendary, or Azurite gear, your DPS spiked up noticeably compared to somebody who didn't have it, even if it was only a singular piece of Azurite gear, with a singular piece of an Azurite stat, a single corruption tier, just the right legendary. If you didn't have that, you were shown on the meters to be significantly behind anybody with a single piece more than you, and classes who naturally do more DPS than you, or less than you comparatively, depending on which class you play, because they scale differently. If they have the piece or you have the piece, etc., that gap gets much larger and more defined. Artifact weapons were implemented well, in my opinion, for everybody who wasn't top tier progression players. World Zone content felt somewhat more relevant. I'm not going to say good. It wasn't bad, it wasn't exactly that good, but it was somewhat relevant because it gave artifact power, which everybody could use at all times. With the power increases in the weapon being not so spiky due to collecting all your minor passive abilities and stat increases on your way to the larger capstone ability. Not every single unlock in the artifact weapon, as far as I know for every class, was a massive increase in power. I said unlock, not capstone. And the grind to increase your power was unlocking another upgrade of your weapon, which felt like a personal goal, because it was personal for your class and spec, different from all others. That was the point of artifact weapons. So what went wrong? Well, Blizzard's implementation of the fucking system, of course. It focused on making players stay logged in the game for as long as possible to squeeze out as much fucking playtime metrics and monthly subs as they could. A great system implemented poorly, I agreed, which made it feel rotten. That's like taking Viagra and your boner lasts more than 4 hours. If it goes well, like it's supposed to, and should have, it feels great. If it doesn't, the experience becomes a negative one. So what went wrong? First off, Legendaries and Legion were far too important for player power. And then there was no catch-up mechanic, I believe, until the very end of the expansion, as well as the chance of getting copy legendaries. No way to target them, some legendaries forcing you to change your entire build and how you play your class and stat distribution to make it work effectively so that you could keep progressing and not have this piece that has more crit on it, but you actually need haste, etc., etc. If you were a casual player, you were probably not invited to groups, or you were kicked from pubs once they saw that your DPS heals and or tanking ability was atrocious because you didn't have the right legendary. That's how noticeable it was. In some cases, you were kicked and not invited because they would check your character and notice you don't even have the right legendary. For BFA, Azurite gear, secondly, was also just too RNG. And the good perks on the gear were too good, and once again caused this incredibly spiky bracket system of power, where it was very defined and very noticeable of your power increase in a spiky way once you got the right trait. Not as bad as Legendaries and Legion, but still. For Shadowlands, Soulbinds have this problem less so in my personal opinion, but one Soulbind was miles better than the others, so picking freely would mean you gimp yourself hard. Remember Pelagos? Covenant powers were more or less not that spiky in my personal opinion at least, but most of the complaints about Shadowlands power comes from the Soulbinds. And to be fair, as far as I know, every class had at least one power, or at least one Covenant power that was very far below the other three. Monks like us, for monks like me, it was Revendreth. Soulbinds were also tied to Covenant rep progression, which was time-gated. In my opinion, having a system of unlimited progression with heavy diminishing returns at a soft cap, like what artifact weapons were, is better than having a hard cap like Shadowlands had. Even if the gains mean nothing, you can also think of BDO. Everything you do that rewards that currency or token or progression power or experience still feels somewhat relevant. You're still gaining something just for playing the game. Shadowlands had a problem of reaching that cap for a week and then just not playing it at all until next week. Heavy diminishing of returns, in my personal opinion, allows insanely dumb hardcore players to keep playing and grinding for every inch of power if they want, but also lets you just slow down and not worry about it again. Because unless you're ready to unrealistically and unhealthily play this game, you're very much incentivized and encouraged to just relax. But if you go off and you decide to do 10 more Mythic Pluses for the week, at least you're getting that artifact power or experience or whatever. It's still pushing somewhat of a bar. You don't feel like it's a complete and utter waste, like Mythic Pluck feels right fucking now, when you do 7 and you have no gear to show for it. Though at this point now we have Worm and Shadow Flame and whatever tokens, but at this point it's too many goddamn currencies. In my opinion, soft caps are better than hard cap. I can't think of a scenario where this is not the case at this point in time. Fourth example, what went wrong? Examples of borrowed power in Dragonflight that we could have gotten is that we could attune to one of the Dragonflights like the new trinket does, which gives you an effect, passive or active. Black Dragonflight could give you a proc chance to get wings and an effect similar to Icebound Fortitude, where you're tankier and you can't be slowed down past a certain point. Blue Dragonflight could, I don't know, spawn want a rune of power on the ground that increases your damage as you stand on it. I get that that's the mage thing, but I'm just saying. Or a small mini game of collecting some drops that fall off of your body to get a buff, like some Shadowlands trinkets did. Emerald Dragonflight could attune itself to get a buff to incoming and outgoing healing if they stood near other Emerald Dragonflight attunes, etc., etc. I feel like Dragonflight missed a good opportunity to actually put more beautifully themed, borrowed powered
I need subtitles. What the fuck are you saying?
into the game that could have been themed around the Dragonflights. Attune to your Dragonflight, pick your Dragonflight, fight for your Dragonflight. It's also not my job to make these immersive and fun without being game breaking. That's Blizzard's, and I doubt it'd be hard for it. Another form of borrowed power that could have been done is through the crafting system. Now, to a degree, this is the case, but expand on it more. Here's what I mean. Attune with a Dragonflight, gain recipes specific to that flight that grant unique effects and power. Blacksmiths can make special weapons that are themed after the flights and have unique effects on them, like black dragon weapons having a chance to cause a burn, or an AoE fire shockwave, and Emerald Dragonflight could do something like have a small chance to root things in place, or I don't know, something of that nature. Armor crafters would get the same thing with the armor. Alchemists could have something like that with potions, special black dragon or emerald dragonflight potion. The crafting profession skill trees that we have right now could have had a custom tab that fits the expansion, putting points into your chosen dragonflight to unlock their bonuses. Next expansion, they take that tab, they get rid of the dragonflight stuff because dragonflight's over, and they put a new system of, quote, themed power in. That way they can tie it into the new crafting system, get people to actually want to do fucking crafting. The biggest problem now is that as of right now, there is nothing to really chase. There's nothing we care to attain or play for in Dragonflight unless you're a hardcore progressor. And BFA, there was no Azerite looking gear or weaponry, and Dragonflight's being cheap on giving us Dragonflight themed armor and weapons. Where's my Emerald Dragon themed staff from my monk? Where's my blue Dragonflight themed one-hand maces or swords? Something. They could let them be some kind of pinnacle crafting reward for doing the hardest content in any game mode, or maybe just getting your rep with the Dragonflights to max, and then you get the recipe to make this unique looking piece of gear. It doesn't have to be powerful. It doesn't have to be a high item level. Just have it be a cosmetic. It doesn't feel like we got anything new outside of the new trinkets, which are pretty amazing, I will admit, and that is fun to use if you're just fucking around. In BFA, we could at least always play with our Heart of Azerok powers in the open world, or PvP, fire a giant beam of fucking Azerite forward. That was fun, it felt good to use. Or whatever Azerite power would you like to use. There was one that summoned a minion, I think towards the end of Dragonflight, that was the best one. You could also just F around in Mythic Keys with the boys, or pugs with the Azerite abilities, it was fun. In Shadowlands, kind of the same thing, we could at least enjoy using our chosen Covenant abilities, how fun they felt, how fun they looked, and the fantasy and immersion of it. In Legion, we at least got to do anything while walking around with our artifact weapons on our backs and hips and pretend like we were that guy.
You're not that guy.
When we rolled up to a world quest or a world boss or joined a pug, like, yeah, I'm the Ashbringer. Let's do this. But what do we have right now? There's nothing of note. The coolest things I've seen so far this expansion are the trinkets, one of which gives us black dragonflight wings and lets us leap, and a trinket that lets you fucking harpoon somebody like they're Moby Dick. But again, those trinkets are, surprise, surprise, not just hard to get because they're in a raid. Not just that, they're in the loot pool as a fucking extra rare drop from the goddamn boss. Thanks, Blizzard. Thanks for making it easy for us to chase something. In conclusion, WoW needs borrowed power system if they want to be able to maintain players, because it gave the game a sense of fantasy and immersion and style and a continuous sense of having fun playing with your class no matter what you were doing and interacting with the theme of the expansion. Even if that fun was only a small dopamine rush from using the ability, or seeing your Ashbringer turn a demon into a pile of ash, or seeing your Heart of Azerok fire out a Kamehameha of yellow and blue. Right now, we don't have anything. Our classes have had nothing new going for it for the most part, outside of huge reworks like Rogue's about to get. We just have baked abilities from the last 4 to 6 years of expansions that we have already used to death. Borrowed power is a good system. It's a great system. If Blizzard actually doesn't go out of their way to purposely implement it poorly. And what I mean is, they went out of their way to make it not fun for players, but fun for their fucking statistics. Time gates, RNG, poor balancing that they can fix later on to get brownie points with the player base, as well as being a 2 birds with 1 stone way of appearing to balance the game and, quote, listen to feedback. I personally believe Dragonflight was a perfect chance for us to gain power from the Dragonflights, maybe even choosing between Order Flights and Primal Flights? Do you want to be part of the Red Dragonflight of Order? Or do you want to side with the Primal Dragonflight of Storm. Something of that nature. It doesn't have to be huge game-breaking borrowed power systems like Heart of Azeroth was, like Azerite Gear was. It could have just been cosmetic effects and maybe a small proc to do a bonus effect. And then when the bonus effect goes off, your weapons glow or your body glows in the color of whatever flight you chose. Like, that's not hard. It's a missed opportunity, and now there's just nothing to do right now. Zarlock Caverns looks amazing, and it feels good to fly around in, but it feels bad to interact with. Hopefully they just pull a BFA and they just introduce a borrow power system towards the end of the expansion that isn't terribly balanced and allows us to once again feel like we're part of this game. We don't need a 4-course meal, but god damn it, throw us a bone. Hey, classmate, keep your voice down. Grandmaster doesn't like us talking during lesson. Do you think you could give me a like and a sub? Every bit helps, you have no idea. Grandmaster's coming this way. Act natural.